Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel Traveling with Sam. And I am here in the airport here in Prague, the Czech Republic, waiting for my dear dad and my lovely stepmom arriving shortly. So I hope you like this video and will comment if you wish, and subscribe if you haven't, and follow us in our adventure around a few countries here in Europe, first starting here in Prague, the Czech Republic. So if you're ready, let's go. Here they are. Time to check in. Walking around now with my dad. Now, dear dad. Going to join a tour now with my stepmom and dad.
As a whole, so you'll have a little bit of a frame of reference for the things that I'll be talking about today. So the Czech Republic is made up of 3 regions. The region that we are in right now, here in the west, is called Bohemia. And then in the southeast, there is the region of Moravia. And in the northeast, a little bit of the region of Silesia. But most of Silesia is actually in Poland today. So the region that we are in, Bohemia, actually a lot of the things that you see described as Bohemian or Boho actually do not relate to this area. This resulted from a mix-up many years ago. A group of Roma travelers, also known as the Gypsies, made their way to Paris. The Parisians were, intrigued with their lifestyle, had never seen this group of people before, so they asked them where they'd come from. Having come from the east, they said Bohemia. So, the Parisians mistook them as actual Bohemians. So still to this day, most of the things that you see described as Bohemian actually relate more to the Gypsy people. But of course you will see some things described as Bohemian that actually do relate to this region of Bohemia.
Such a gorgeous day, gorgeous Friday here. Sun shining, a lot of people as we go to the astronomical clock with our tour guide and tour leader, Laura.
Look like this. And then now that your arm's up there, just pull down your sleeve and look at your watch. Gotcha. Pointing almost at 15, which you might be thinking that's not what time it is. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, That is because this is called Bohemian time. During the time that Bohemian time was created, long before the existence of electricity, everything revolved around the sun. So when the sun would set, that would be the end of one day and the beginning of the next. So this actually shows the number of hours since the last sunset. Now if you go in a little bit more to the next dial there, you will see numbers 1 through 12 twice. This is called Germanic time. This is regular time that we use today, although it is 1 hour off this half of the year because of daylight savings time. So we just had daylight savings time a couple days ago, so now we're in that awkward half of the year where it's 1 hour off, and then the other half of the year would be the accurate time. And then there's actually a third way to tell the time on the clock as well. So if you see the sun that is attached to the arm of the clock there, that'll rotate with the arm of the clock throughout the day. So whenever the sun has the blue background behind it, that means that it's daytime. The red background is for sunrise and sunset, and then the black background means that it is nighttime. So that is called Babylonian time. The sun is also, of course, in the zodiac sign that we are in right now. Back in the 15th century when this clock was built, people didn't use the zodiac so much for horoscope purposes like people like to use it for today, but it would have been important to know the alignment of the stars for other reasons, navigational purposes, things like that, like sticks with ribbons sticking out of it. You guys see that? That is a Eastern tradition here in the Czech Republic. They're actually switches. So this is kind of an awkward tradition, in my opinion. You guys will probably think it's a little awkward as well. But the men are meant to whip the women on Easter and the day after Easter. And it's supposed to promote beauty, fertility, youthfulness, things like that. So yeah, a little awkward in my opinion, but they still do that today. So you'll see those in all the Easter markets, things like that. So I want to point out this building here. This is a church. It's called Church of Our Lady Before Teen. It has Dimensional Powers. If you look closely at these two towers, there's actually something a little bit unusual about them. The tower on the right is actually a little bit wider than the tower on the left. So this is called Adam and Eve towers, when one tower is larger than the other. The larger tower represents Adam, and the smaller tower represents Eve. However, we do have our suspicions that in this particular instance, this was actually accidental, and the towers were intended to be the same size. So the reasons for that, one, typically Adam and Eve towers are much more obvious than this. You might have even noticed at first that they're different sizes. Usually the Adam tower would be much wider and also much taller than the Eve tower. Also, this church took 150 years to build, and only at the very end of that 150-year time period is when Adam and Eve towers came into style in the architectural world. So we do have our suspicions that somebody just, messed up. They were meant to be the same size and then explained it away with the newest trend of the time, but nobody ever admitted to that, so I guess we don't know for sure. So basically they didn't want to put the church in the square because that would have taken up space from the market, so they actually intentionally built it behind the building. And actually its name, the word teen, means like cornered or enclosed in the old Czech language, so that's how it gets its name as well. Today it's not an actively practicing church. It's a museum, as are many of the churches in Prague, since not that many people are actively practicing religion, but you can go inside, it's free. It is a little bit confusing to find the entrance. You have to go through the arches in the building in front of it to get to the entrance, so that's how you get there if you play. This is a popular Czech cartoon character. He's called Kurtek, which means little mole. He's been around for quite a while, several decades. He's still really popular today. But during the communist era, he was pretty popular here and in other communist Eastern European countries. So some people like to call him the communist Mickey Mouse. I like to call him the mascot of Prague. But yeah, he's still really popular today. And the cartoon doesn't have any words in it, so you can watch it. It doesn't really matter what language you speak. Actually, my little niece back in the United States watches it now, so it's a very cute show. And if you have some kids back home to buy a souvenir for, that's a nice souvenir from Prague. In the 17th century, it was used to store gunpowder. But today it's just a popular landmark here in Prague. It's kind of cool and old looking, you could say, as well. And then I'm also going to talk about this orange building this way, so I'll stand over here. So this building here, this is called the House of the Black Madonna. So it gets its name because of this ornament here on the corner behind those Roman bars, which is of course a Black Madonna and child. So as I mentioned earlier, all the houses in Old Town used to kind of have an ornament like this, before there were street addresses, so that's how people would get around. Associations with Mozart. So Mozart would have been living in Vienna, Austria, during the time that his opera Marriage of Figaro was debuted. And it really was not all that successful in Vienna. At the grand premiere, people were quite literally falling asleep in their seats from boredom. But when the same opera was premiered here in Prague, here it was a huge success. So news of this success traveled to Mozart in Vienna, and he decided that he needed to come here to see these people who appreciated him during his time. So Mozart ended up spending quite a lot of time here in Prague over the next few years. He actually developed a bit of a party boy reputation here in Prague that usually surprises people. People don't typically think of Mozart in that way, but he was a young man. He spent a lot of time partying, a lot of time drinking, because he knew how to have fun. So about 3 years later, when he had his next opera to debut called Don Giovanni, he decided what better place for the grand premiere than the Various States Theater here in Prague. So Don Giovanni was premiered for the very first time here in this theater. And this time it was a huge success. At the grand premiere, there was a 30-minute long standing ovation. So if you can just imagine standing there clapping for half an hour. Must have really liked the show. The mayor of the Jewish town at the time, Mordecai Meisel, in the year 1592. It was actually burned down about 100 years after that. It's been rebuilt in beginning in 1918, so that's the version that you're seeing here today. It is not an actively practicing synagogue anymore. Today it is a part of the Jewish Museum, which I would definitely recommend visiting if you have the time. The way the Jewish Museum works is you buy one ticket, and then that grants you access into 6 different historical buildings throughout the Jewish quarter. They all have exhibits inside them, and then you also get to go inside the old Jewish cemetery. I would say like 2 to 3 hours for the Jewish Museum is good, but just a heads up, they are closed on Saturdays for Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, so don't plan on going tomorrow, but every other day they're open. Close to the statue there in a second when that other group goes, but I'll tell you about Franz Kafka, in here. Franz Kafka was born and raised here in Prague, lived most of his life here. He was also Jewish, so fitting that he has this statue here in the Jewish quarter. Franz Kafka was definitely a bit of a troubled soul, you could say, and that was reflected in the themes of his writings, which were dark, dreamlike, kind of weird, you could say. If you've read anything by Kafka, then you know what I mean. He was never rich or famous for his writing during his lifetime, really even known as a writer. Actually, throughout his life, most of his writings were just sitting in a cardboard box in the corner of his bedroom, unpublished, and just collecting dust. He actually worked as an insurance salesman for most of his life, which he wasn't particularly passionate about, but it was the 9 to 5 that paid the bills, and then that's when he would go home and do his writing. You could say it looks a little bit more like a mosque than a synagogue, so that's kind of interesting. This is also a part of the Jewish Museum today. It's not an actively practicing synagogue anymore, but if you buy the ticket, you can go inside, and there's exhibits in there as well. This is one of the newer synagogues here in the Jewish quarter. It was originally built in the 1800s, and this is still the original building. Old new synagogue. It's actually very old. It dates back to the 1200s. It's still actively practicing. This is actually the oldest actively practicing synagogue in all of Europe today, so they still have this is also home to the famous Prague legend, the legend of the Golem. Has anyone heard that story? The funny looking one, the one on the bottom. So that clock was created by a well-respected clockmaker here in Prague, but he was not Jewish himself, okay? So when he was tasked with making this clock for the Jewish people here in the Jewish quarter, he really wanted to do a good job. So he thought long and hard about how to do this, to the point where you could say he definitely overthought some things, okay? So he came to the conclusion, well, Hebrew, the language of the Jewish people, is written and read from right to left, backwards, so that must mean that Jewish people do everything backwards, right? So this clock actually rotates counterclockwise, backwards. He also went ahead and switched the long and the short arms, because, Jewish people do everything backwards, apparently. And then he added the Hebrew numerals, because, how else would the Jewish people tell what time it is? Now, of course, the Jewish people did not know this was. They tell time just like everybody else, so then they had to add the regular clock up above as well. So that is just kind of the funny story of how this clock came to be. The building that the clock is on is Jewish Town Hall. Jewish Town used to be considered its own town, as was, Old Town, New Town, all the different neighborhoods. They do still use this building for like a community center for the small population of Jewish people here in Prague today.
Now we're in the old new synagogue here in the Jewish quarter. Inside the Clausen synagogue now. Morning and afternoon Shabbat. It's Jewish holiday. Cemetery. inside the Pinkasova Synagogue, and these are all names of lives lost during the Holocaust. It's surreal of how many names. Different places of like the concentration camps. Here are some of the photos made by children that were kept, that were saved for their hopes and dreams. This was the woman who kept the pictures, drawings safe. She went to Auschwitz. Her husband was a Holocaust survivor and went back and dug up these pictures. But unfortunately, she didn't survive the Holocaust. So you can search for a name. Dad's trying to put in some name. Now going to the cemetery, Jewish cemetery. Here's the cemetery.
This cemetery in the area of the former ghetto was not the oldest Jewish cemetery in Prague. There exist well-documented reports about it from the early 15th century. Nevertheless, today it ranks among the oldest and largest existing Jewish cemeteries in Europe. In Hebrew, the term for cemetery is Beit Chaim, the house of life. That is because death for Jews is the gate to life in the next world, as well as the moment when the departed enters life on earth for a second, and continued for nearly another 350 years. In the course of its long existence, the cemetery was expanded several times, and finally even reduced in size when the ghetto was abolished at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. It was never able to cope completely with the needs of the ghetto, and that gave it its unique form of an undulating garden with tombstones piled on top of each other. Jewish custom forbids the disturbance of a person's final resting place, but because there was not enough room in Prague to bury the dead, earth was piled onto old graves, other bodies were placed into these new mounds, but only the tombstone on top reminds us of how many persons are buried at any one spot.
All in Hebrew. Cannot read any of it.
Where'd you
Time
see
for
the salad, the Greek salad?
Everywhere salad.
Traditional Czech lunch. First time for my dad and stepmom to try svíčková, which is like beef with dumplings and gravy sauce and cranberry sauce. Crystal work. The Czech Republic. Man from the sea. You see the face. Girl from the forest. Now going for an evening walk. Now the evening Easter markets. Friday night with my dad. So pretty here in the evening. Green beer for Easter Thursday, Green Thursday here. The they still have it, even though Easter has passed, but they still have the markets for another week or so, maybe 2. Nice atmosphere. Time for dinner here at the beer restaurant. Going to have traditional cabbage soup served in bread. Time to try for my dad a traditional chimney cake here. Got walnut flavor. I've had one before. There we go, walnut and ice cream. A fun night out in Prague.